Welcome to Indian Circle. We're going to read a story called Mulberry Bend. The year is 1888 and the city is New York. This is a story about a man named Jacob and a place called Mulberry Bend. It is a true story that happened a long time ago. Jacob and his wife, Elizabeth, lived in a little house. They had two daughters, Kate and Clara. There were many trees near Jacob's house, and there were fields on every side of it, and in the fields there were many flowers. Jacob worked for a newspaper in the city, and each morning he would say goodbye to Elizabeth and said goodbye to Kate and Clara, and then he left the little house and he walked down to the river. And there he got on the ferry that took him across the river to the city. Each day when he got to the city, Jacob walked along the streets, and as he walked, he saw many things. One day he saw a fire truck going to a fire, and one day he saw a circus coming to town, and one day he saw a parade going by. Each day Jacob saw something new. Then he went to his room where he worked, and he wrote a story about what he had seen. Every day his story was printed in the newspaper. Every day people read the new story that Jacob wrote. One day Jacob was going home after work. On the way, he stopped and went into a dark street. He knew this street very well. It was called Mulberry Bend. No other street in the city was so dark. No other street had houses so old, and no other street had people who were so poor. Jacob had written many times about Mulberry Bend. He had written that the old houses should be torn down, and he had written that new ones should be built in their place, and he had written that a playground should be built so that the children would have a place to play. But nothing had been done about Mulberry Bend. Nothing can be done about it, people said. And then they did not think about Mulberry Bend anymore. That day, Jacob saw Albert, a boy who lived on Mulberry Bend. "How's your mother today?" he asked. "Is she still sick?" "Yes," said Albert, "but she's getting better." "I guess if you could," Jacob said, "you could pick some flowers for your mother. Sick people feel better when they have flowers to look at." "Do they?" Albert asked. Jacob nodded. "Well, then I would pick some for my mother," Albert said. "Only I don't know what flowers are like. I've never seen any." "You've never seen any flowers?" Jacob said. "But Albert, in the country, flowers grow everywhere." "I've never been to the country," Albert said. "My mother is too poor to take me, and I've never been away from Mulberry Bend." So Jacob sat down, and he tried to tell Albert what flowers were like. He said flowers grow out of the ground, and he said that some flowers smell good and some flowers do not smell at all. He said that flowers come in many colors, and some were red, and some were blue, and some were white, and some were yellow. When Jacob finished, Albert thought he knew what flowers were like, and he said that one day he would like to see some. Then Jacob went away from Mulberry Bend, and he walked to the river, and he took the ferry back across the river, and he began to walk up the hill to his house. Kate and Clara saw him coming, and they ran down the road, and they jumped into his arms. And as they walked home together, Jacob looked at the field by the road, and that was filled with flowers, and Jacob thought about Albert. He told Clara and Kate about the boy he had talked to that day. A boy who had never been away from a dark street called Mulberry Bend. A boy who had never seen flowers. The next morning, Kate and Clara ate breakfast. They ran out of the house and went into the fields. They picked all the flowers they could carry, and then they ran down to the ferry and gave the flowers to Jacob. "We picked these for Albert," they said, "the boy who never saw flowers." When Albert saw the flowers, he said nothing for a long, long time. So Jacob said, "Don't you like them?" "Oh, I like them very much," Albert said. "I never knew anything could be so beautiful. I'll take them up to my mother, and they will make her feel better." Other children who lived on Mulberry Bend came over. They had never seen flowers either. They asked if they could look at them and hold them and smell them. And all the children said the flowers were beautiful. One little girl thought they were so beautiful, she began to cry. That day, Jacob wrote a story for his newspaper about the children and the flowers. And he took the newspaper home and showed it to Kate and Clara. They were happy because they had picked the flowers for Albert. But that was not all that happened. That night, many other people read Jacob's story, and they felt sad about the children on Mulberry Bend. The next morning, they went into the fields and picked flowers, just as Kate and Clara had. Then they took the flowers into the city. The people came on trains. People came on horse cars. People came in carriages carrying flowers. They took flowers to the room where Jacob worked. Please give these to the children on Mulberry Bend, they said. And soon the room was filled with flowers. Jacob put his head out the window, and more people were coming with flowers. Jacob went out and got a big wagon, and he filled the wagon with flowers and took them to Mulberry Bend. There were flowers for everyone, each of the children, for each of the mothers, for their fathers, and still there were more flowers. They put the flowers in the windows. They put the flowers on the fire escapes from the top to the bottom. Each house had nothing but flowers on it. And that day, Mulberry Bend was the most beautiful street in the city. Jacob wrote a story about that too, and many people read that story. And before long, they began to say, "We must do something about Mulberry Bend." Jacob lived to be an old man, and he saw many things change in the city. One day, the old houses on Mulberry Bend were torn down, and before long, new ones were built to take their place. And finally, a playground was built where poor children of Mulberry Bend could play. But nothing ever made Jacob quite as happy as that day long ago, when a boy named Albert saw flowers for the first time. When all the children on Mulberry Bend saw flowers for the first time. When a little girl cried because the flowers she was holding looked so beautiful. Thank you for listening to Mulberry Bend.